first weekend in July, the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time, the 6th chapter of Mark. We're rocking. And, again, another well-known passage, this famous saying, prophet without honour in his own town, and the sending of the 12. Gillian, John, Damon from around the country, welcome. Gillian, you have some background.
Yes, I've got some background. One of the things I love about Mark's Gospel is it is a book of two halves, and this chapter is in the first half where all this sort of discussion is around about who is this man, who is Jesus? And the answers are going to range quite widely. And in this particular chapter, it's like, is he the carpenter's son? Like, who is he? And then the next section here, it's going to be, well, is he John raised from the dead? And then ultimately, Jesus will ask the disciples in chapter 8, who do you say that I am? And of course, they do get the correct answer, which is the Messiah. But I think this passage fits really well into that whole section of trying to work out Jesus' identity and who actually is this person.
I seem to remember at college we used to call it, or we still call it, the Christological question. John, help me then with what you find challenging.
Well, I find challenging overcoming the same kind of prejudice and suspicion of people that Jesus faced towards the church today. And yet the mission still continued. So we have a challenge of, as I say, overcoming that same prejudice. People who think they know it all, but they probably don't. Just like people thought they knew who Jesus was, but they really didn't. And the challenge is knowing what the good news was that the 70s spoke to the people in such a powerful way, it changed their hearts and lives. And what's the message that we can give that would speak good news to a very different world? I reckon that's a challenge.
It is indeed. Damon, what do you find challenging?
I'm just following on from what John said, that the whole idea of rejection. And as I read this passage, I just pondered the number of times that, all of us have experienced at some stage a form of rejection in our own lives. And it may have been in the schoolyard, it may have been by a friend or a partner, it may have been in the context of a job interview or whatever. It's a common experience. And here's Jesus having risen to such fame, I suppose, and widespread popularity, finding his own hometown that same sense of rejection, and what that must have been like for Jesus. And the other side of it for me, and I suppose it picks up where John was saying too, is that we've all experienced rejection in our lives in one form or another, because of our beliefs or behavior or values or opinions or whatever it is. But we've probably also been involved in the rejection of another, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so this passage just gives me pause to stop and to consider the ways that perhaps, whether intentionally or not, I have made someone else feel a little bit rejected.
We're all capable of it. I'm fascinated, but because this year we hold Mark and John together, that we've got Mark with a very vivid scene, and John, this wonderful poetic, he came to his own and his own knew him not. So something about rejection very deep in this incarnation story. Gillian, what do you see as challenging?
Well, I was kind of curious to know what it was that Jesus had been preaching or teaching in the synagogue that caused them to be so offended, scandalized, in terms of the Greek word there, escandalo, which makes me think strangely of kind of telenovelas, those kind of Spanish daytime dramas where everybody's like, escandalo. But so what caused that kind of outrage and shock that they were experiencing? And it made me think of, perhaps Luke 4, where Jesus is preaching from Isaiah, and that similar story of how then they're outraged and take him to the cliff to throw him off, but he just passes through them and walks away. But it made me think about what maybe I talk about in my chapels, or in sermons, what do we cause outrage or scandal, or are we really challenging people by what we are preaching about, or are we comforting? There's a time and place for comforting people, of course, but maybe there is a time and place to challenge and cause a scandalo by what we might preach about.
Nice. And if we don't, I think it was, I'm not sure which theologian I've been reading recently said that if we don't, then there's something seriously wrong with our proclamation. So let's, move from scandal to good news. And if I can ask you, Damon, to start, unpacking some good news for us.
I mean, in spite of the rejection that Jesus experienced, the offence that was taken at the message he proclaimed, he didn't go into retreat or into hiding. He moved through this period and continued to make a significant difference in the lives of people. And we just have to think of the stories that precede this one about the Gerasene demoniac set free from this experience of being entrapped, and the immediately preceding it, the woman bleeding and the synagogue leader's daughter. That sense that the message that is proclaimed is about experiencing a fullness of life, about being set free to be who we truly are. And so here's Jesus saying, oh yeah, a bit of a hiccup here. Those who I expected perhaps would have more warmly received me haven't, but I'm not going to give up here. I'm going to keep on going.
He's tenacious. Gillian, unpack some good news.
I quite like the idea that his brothers, James, Jude, if that's the connection with who they are in terms of the letters in the New Testament, that although they had just think, oh, he's just our brother, who is he? He's out of his mind, like from Mark chapter 3. But then eventually, they do receive the good news and they do realize who he is and become important part of the early church. So even if we have been rejected, or there are people who turn away from our message, not to give up, and perhaps not to shake the dust off our feet at them totally, but to kind of never give up on people, really, because you never know where that's going to go.
And I love the fact that they, whether it's traditional or actual fact, become these authors backing up Big Brother at a purely human level. I enjoy that sense. John, for you, good news.
Yep. Following on from what Damon said, the mission continues. Jesus wasn't put off. Jesus needs partners in this mission, and we're invited and required to be partners with Jesus, or partners with God in the mission. And this partnership that we have with God makes our daily activities and actions in the world pretty special and holy. I think that's a good thing to think about. And it brings to light that prayer attributed to St. Teresa of Avila, Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. So I think that's good news.
It is indeed, and very encouraging. But let's go to an application. We can, be very selfish about this good news and stick it in our pipe and smoke it in a sense, but how do we get it out? What's the application in our context? Damon, for you, so what?
It follows on from Jesus' experience in a hometown. We have the mission of the 12, and so Jesus, although he has experienced this moment from his own people, he then goes on and he sends the disciples to do exactly what he's been doing, and we too. Jesus sends us out. He doesn't promise that this will be always easy, that we too will face obstacles and rejection and hardship along the way. We just have to think of the following passage, which is about the death of John the Baptist, to know that discipleship is tough, and yet he promises to be with us. And I think that's a heartening part of this particular passage, that as we go on our way to spread this good news, we are not alone.
And Mark doesn't pull any punches when he holds those two together, the next week's passage and this one, the ups and the downs, but the tenacity for us as well is called for. John, and both John and Gillian, you're both in school chaplaincy context. It'll be interesting to hear this, but John, for you, an application, so what?
Well, Jesus could be nothing special in the eyes of the people he grew up with. To them, he was very ordinary, it makes me wonder that God's special graces and blessings can come wrapped up in the ordinariness of everyday people and everyday moments. And there's a great chant we play in school chapel by Bernadette Farrell called Everyday God. You can look that up on Spotify. It's really cool.
I will do that. I need more music for the church on that. Excellent. And yep, we're not, as John Bell, I think it is, who says, there's not many extraordinary folk here. Present company, well, you can decide. Gillian, a final word. Where do you so what this?
I was going to lead on a little bit from what Damon said about, going, the ministry carries on. And I love the fact that they go 2 by 2. And it makes me think of at school, when even in a high school, if you're going down to the cathedral or something, we're all walking down there. It's buddy up in a pair, crossing the road, making sure you're holding hands. That kind of idea from, early days of school. You've got to kind of hold hands and stick together, really. And so I think, for in ministry, and we can often be quite isolated in our own schools or parishes or where we are, to have that kind of sense of intentional connection with each other and support in our ministry, a mentor or a someone who's a colleague, someone who you can actually share this ministry with, and the joys and the struggles, those ups and downs, so that you can actually continue.
Thanks for that. And yes, we can tend to be very selfish at times, but there's a challenge for us to share the load and to be body of Christ. It's been a good passage. It's been a good conversation. Thank you, John. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Damon, for breaking open the gospel word.